Who killed the guitar god Jimi Hendrix? It's the 55th anniversary of his very suspicious death, on September 18, 1970. The tragic death of the only 27-year-old Jimi Hendrix, who therefore unfortunately joined the 27 Club and who was considered by most top guitarists to be the greatest rock guitarist in history, remained as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries. But now, after 55 long years and extensive investigations, collected data, insider leaks and analysis by Jimi's preferred album cover photographer Karl Ferris, of his 3 US debut album covers, Are You Experienced, Electric Ladyland and Axis Bold as Love, the case has been finally solved. The original London coroner reported the cause of death as inhalation of vomit following barbiturate intoxication. But later, New Scotland Yard reopened a brief inquiry in 1992, but due to inconclusive evidence and assumption that it was just an overdose, soon announced the case was no longer of public interest. But now, finally, new evidence has now come to light, proving that Jimi Hendrix was unintentionally murdered. But by whom? Just before his demise, Hendrix was about to finally fire his manager, Mike Jeffrey, who had launched his career 4 years earlier. Jeffrey was also the manager of the Animals and other groups, and had close British mob and New York mafia connections, boasted of having once been a British intelligence operative and spoke fluent Russian, and was responsible for Cold War assassinations and undercover bomb attacks. Although Hendrix and his group, The Experience, had earned more than $30 million from 3 albums and relentless touring, they found themselves inappropriately paid after discovering that their high-living manager, the ex-spy, kept the money in hidden numbered bank accounts in the Bahamas. In the spring of 1969, a recording and tour-exhausted Hendrix decided to disband his tired of and repetitious Experience band, which greatly infuriated Jeffrey, and in an attempt to bring him back to heel, Jeffrey engineered a drug plant and self-informed bust in Toronto, Canada, from which he then, with lawyers, saved Jimi. Then months later had Jimi temporarily kidnapped at gunpoint by his New York mafia friends, from who he also conveniently saved him. But these intimidations didn't work on Hendrix, and refusing to resurrect the cash cow but repetitive Experience band, Jimi launched his all-black band of gypsies, which Jeffrey then sabotaged by giving them some bad LSD during a performance. Then, later, following a brief drug-addled German tour in September 1970, which ended with an in-concert Hells Angels riot and fire, Jimi fled to London, telling a confidant he felt surrounded by wolves. Who were these wolves? Paternity suit lawyers? Breach of contract lawyers? New York mafia loan collectors for his Electric Ladyland recording studio? Ex-girlfriends? And Jeffrey himself, whose management contract was about to expire? Hiding from them all, Jimi convinced Miles Davis's manager, Alan Douglas, to represent him and support his new jazz musical direction, and possibly arrange for him to join a new Miles Davis band. For Jeffrey, losing Jimi would mean a takeover auditing disaster and prosecution for his embezzlement and mismanagement and fraud, plus bankruptcy and possibly a long imprisonment. The ex-spy used phone tapping devices and informants to keep track of his artists, especially Jimi, who said, "If I'm free, it's because I'm always running." In the end, he was running with a mysterious blonde, Monica Danneman, who he had met on his disastrous German concert tour and had only known for a few days. So his friends called her a stalker, because she'd just followed him from Germany. But despite his paranoia, he didn't seem to suspect his girlfriend de jour might also be his manager's informant. But yes, she was, as Jeffrey had called her to find out where they were staying. So he knew where to send his thugs to intimidate Jimi. Tappy Wright, the author of the book Rock Roadie, in which he wrote that Jeffrey had confessed to killing Jimi, but then later said to a colleague who disapproved of his betrayal of Jeffrey that he had just made it up to sell his book with an ironic smile on his face. but then much later, shortly before his imminent death in 2016. When asked by an intimate family member in the hospital to finally tell the truth about how he actually knew that Mike Jeffrey was telling the truth about killing Hendrix, said, "Because I was Mike's right-hand man and knew all about it." And then he finally confessed that on orders from Jeffrey. His infamous Newcastle club Go security enforcer, the Turk, and 2 other thugs had in fact waterboarded Jimi that night. Which was no doubt very familiar to Jeffrey, the spy, as forced hydration of this kind was an interrogation torture technique that left no marks on the body. But the intention, Tappy insisted, was definitely not to kill Jimi, as this would have caused a huge police investigation, but it was only to put the fear of death and to intimidate him. And as with the former arranged kidnapping and drug bust, it was to terrify him into submission to Jeffrey's control once and for all. But this last intimidation got way out of control and proved fatal. Because, unknown to them, Jimi had taken several Vesperax tablets earlier and so was highly sedated. Therefore, Jimi was unable to recover from the waterboarding. And, as the ambulance man John Sauer had originally testified, Hendrix must have put up a struggle by the looks of the room. And had the case been properly investigated and not mishandled by the police, who assumed it was simply an overdose case, the result would have been severe, because under British law, the perpetrators and their boss, Jeffrey, even though their intention may not have been to kill Hendrix, would have been prosecuted as a transferred malice murder case and faced life imprisonment. On the day of the attack, Danneman was told by the perpetrators to leave because they needed privacy with Jimi, which she did. Then, hours later, an anonymous call for an ambulance was placed around noon, and when the ambulance men arrived, they found Jimi fully clothed on top of the bed, covered with vomit and much dark liquid, and no one else there. Then, on arrival at the local hospital, the doctor on duty, in a futile attempt to revive the star, tried to clear his windpipe with a suction tube, and said huge amounts of vomit and liquids were coming out of his nose and mouth, he later testified. So without the ability to breathe, he was drowned by the vomit and water. It was horrific. Questioned by police later that day, Danneman said she had given Hendrix some German brand of Seconal Vesperax tablets to help him sleep, but she had no idea of what had later happened and how he might have been asphyxiated, as she was out at that time looking for a cigarette shop. Then later, after Jimi's funeral, she met secretly with Jeffrey, who warned and threatened her never to reveal what really happened that night, but if she cooperated, he promised to manage her and market her paintings for her and provide her monthly financial support. But in 1995, after Jeffrey's supposed demise, she released a book titled The Inner World of Jimi Hendrix, and by that time she had floated many ever-changing and contradictory stories about what had happened that night. But now she was going to tell all, intimating murder and possible mob involvement. But days before she was to do the tell-all for an important London radio station, she was found very suspiciously asphyxiated by her car's exhaust, alone in her car with all the windows closed. Which was very convenient and probably arranged by the still possibly alive Jeffrey to get rid of witnesses. Because also earlier and seemingly connected, Devon Wilson, Jimi's longtime close friend and confidant, had died from a suspicious fall from a window of the Chelsea Hotel in New York. As a result of Hendrix's death by what authorities originally classed as a misadventure, Jeffrey's management contract was continued by default, and he was able to collect on a £1 million life insurance policy which had been put in place a few months earlier. He also retained control over all the Hendrix music catalogue revenues, which generated millions annually. In a final truth, stranger than fiction development, in 1973 the ex-spy, days before he was scheduled to return to London from Spain, to face huge lawsuits relating to his Hendrix financial embezzlement, money laundering and fraud, which would have resulted in a very long prison sentence, was reportedly killed in a very suspicious plane collision between 2 planes over Nantes, France. in which all 68 people on board were killed, and an unrecognizable headless body was labeled Michael Jeffrey, simply because it was one of the unaccounted for bodies on the passenger list, and was only assumedly identified by his recovered jewelry found scattered in the crash site, possibly from the travel case which he had checked in, but then did not board the plane. But no DNA or dental chart cross-checks were done for identification, which are normally done, and the French authorities mysteriously refused to release the aircraft's black box to independent investigators. Why? Then Eric Burden of the Animals and many other former Jeffrey clients surmised that their former manager, the ex-spy, might have taken advantage of this accident to deliberately fake his own death, because in the then low-security boarding procedure he could have checked his bag and then deliberately missed the flight, as he often did, as he had told them, that he was always paranoid of planes, because he had many hardcore enemies, and as a former spy was scared of a possible assassination by a plane explosion. Therefore he could have taken advantage of this very convenient actual crash to fake his own death, thereby avoiding his impending long imprisonment for all his fraudulent activities. And then, to make this believable, he totally disappeared, probably to his own secret estate somewhere with a fake identity, and was never seen again, living secretly and royally on Hendrix's money hidden away in his Bahamas numbered offshore accounts. And so the guitar god, a genius Mozart of the 20th century, was gone. But his immortal voodoo child refrain lives on. If I don't meet you no more in this world, I'll meet in the next, and don't be late.
If I don't see you no more in this world, I'll meet y'all on the next one.